I thought she was just my mom's friend, until the night her smile lingered, and she whispered, "Don't pretend you don't feel this." I didn't notice her at first the way a man notices a woman. She was just my mom's friend, someone I'd seen a handful of times in passing over the years, always in the background of family dinners or quick visits. But that summer evening, something was different. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was her. Maybe it was both. Her name was Elena. She arrived at our house just as the sun was lowering, painting the living room in warm gold. She stepped inside with that effortless grace some women carry, not loud, not demanding attention, just quietly magnetic. She hugged my mom, laughing softly, then turned to me. "You've grown," she said, her voice low and warm, as though she was letting me in on some private secret. I smiled back, trying to hide how much I noticed her. She was in her early 40s, but she carried herself with a confidence that made her presence feel ageless. The faint shine of her earrings caught the light, but it was her eyes that held me, dark, alive, with a softness that made you want to stay in them longer than you should. When she placed her hand on my shoulder in greeting, it was nothing, really, just a friendly gesture. But it lingered half a second too long, enough to leave a trace of warmth even after she'd pulled away. I told myself I imagined it. She was my mom's friend. That was all. Still, I found myself noticing things I hadn't before. The way she adjusted the strap of her necklace as if it mattered to her that it sat perfectly. The faint trace of perfume she carried, something floral with a little spice, that seemed to move with her every time she walked past. Even the way she listened, leaning in slightly, tilting her head when my mom spoke, like she was present in every moment. Dinner was ordinary chicken, salad, wine. The three of us talked and laughed, but I couldn't shake the strange awareness every time Elena's eyes flicked to me. Not long, never obvious, but just enough to make my chest tighten. When she laughed at something I said, it wasn't the polite laugh adults give younger men. It was rich, genuine, as though I'd said something worth remembering. After dinner, as my mom busied herself clearing plates, Elena stayed seated across from me at the table. For a brief moment, it was just the two of us. She rested her chin lightly against her hand and studied me. Not critically, but curiously, like she was measuring something. "You've changed," she said softly, almost to herself. I should have asked what she meant, but I froze, caught off guard by the intimacy in her tone. Before I could reply, my mom returned, breaking the spell. But I carried that moment with me, that look, that tone. The way her hand had lingered on my shoulder. It was nothing. It had to be nothing. And yet, it didn't feel like nothing at all. It was supposed to be an ordinary evening. My mom busied herself in the kitchen, humming to old songs on the radio, while Elena and I were left in the living room. At first, the silence between us felt casual, unimportant. Two people sharing the same space, nothing more. But the longer it stretched, the heavier it became, like even the air around us was waiting for something. Elena broke it first. She asked about my life, about school, about work. Her voice carried that mixture of curiosity and warmth that made you feel seen, like your answers actually mattered. I told her little things, nothing dramatic, just fragments of who I was. But she listened as though each detail was a story worth keeping. "You notice things others don't," she said once, smiling. "That's rare at your age." Her words disarmed me. I wanted to ask what she meant, but her gaze, steady, unwavering, was enough to silence me. I looked away, pretending to adjust my glass of water, though my hand felt clumsy under her attention. At one point, she leaned forward to hand me the pitcher, and her fingers brushed mine. It was the simplest touch, but my skin burned where her hand had grazed me. I didn't move right away, and neither did she. For the smallest fraction of time, it felt like we were suspended in something fragile and dangerous. Then she pulled back, gracefully, as though nothing had happened. The conversation carried on, but every word felt charged, every pause loaded with the weight of what we weren't saying. She asked about the books I read, and I admitted my love for stories that feel alive, narratives that linger after the last page. She smiled at that, her eyes narrowing slightly as though she understood more than I'd said. You want things that last, she murmured. Not just moments that disappear. I nodded, unable to explain why her words landed so deeply. From the kitchen, my mom's laughter carried in, grounding me, reminding me of where we were and who she was. But sitting across from Elena, it felt like we were in our own world, a private orbit the rest of the house couldn't touch. There was a moment when she leaned back, tilting her head, her hair catching the faint glow of the lamp. She studied me quietly, almost as if she was waiting for me to say something I didn't yet have the courage to. I felt the question in her eyes, though she never spoke it aloud. When my mom finally returned with dessert, the spell broke. Elena straightened, her expression softening back into something casual, polite. But as she passed me a slice of cake, her hand brushed mine again. Lightly, intentionally this time. I looked up at her and she smiled. A smile that lingered. A smile that said more than her words ever could. And for the first time, I stopped telling myself I was imagining it. The next time I saw her, it was at a small family gathering. Nothing special, just neighbors and a few friends in the backyard, music low, the smell of grilled food hanging in the summer air. I tried to play it cool, tried to treat Elena like she was anyone else in the crowd. But from the moment she arrived, I felt her presence as if the space itself shifted to make room for her. At one point, as the evening stretched on, I stepped outside onto the porch to get some air. The voices and laughter inside dulled to a low hum, replaced by the chorus of crickets and the faint rustle of leaves. That's when Elena appeared, carrying her glass of wine, moving with that same unhurried grace. She didn't ask if she could sit. She just did, settling beside me as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You like quiet," she said softly, glancing at me. I shrugged, trying not to look at how the light from the porch lantern traced the line of her cheek. "Sometimes it's easier to think when it's quiet." She smiled, and there was a touch of sadness in it. "You're right. Quiet has a way of telling us things noise can't." We talked then, not about anything monumental, but about books, about memories, about places she had traveled when she was younger. Her voice carried a rhythm that felt steadying, but underneath, there was a tenderness I hadn't noticed before. It was as though, in the quiet, she allowed a piece of her guard to fall. As she spoke, she leaned just slightly toward me. Our arms didn't touch at first, but the closeness was enough to make me hyper-aware of every inch of space between us. Then, casually, she shifted. Her knee brushed against mine. A small thing, maybe even accidental, but she didn't move away and neither did I. The air thickened. The sound of crickets seemed louder, the weight of silence heavier. I wanted to say something, to name the electricity building between us, but my throat tightened. So I sat there, caught between the urge to move closer and the fear of what it would mean. Then, from inside the house, my mom's voice called out, cheerful, oblivious. Elena didn't flinch, but she did turn to me, her eyes locking with mine. For a heartbeat, her hand found mine on the porch railing. The touch was feather-light, fleeting. By the time she rose from her chair, it was gone. But the message was clear. She wasn't ignoring it. She wasn't pretending. And as she walked back inside, I realized neither was I anymore. It happened late one night, when the house had settled into that comfortable quiet that only comes after everyone else has gone to bed. I'd gone into the kitchen for a glass of water, still half lost in the thoughts she'd left me with on the porch days before. And there she was, Elena, standing by the counter, pouring tea into a delicate cup like she belonged there. The overhead light was dim, throwing a soft glow across the room. She was in a simple blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders, and something about seeing her there, unguarded, at ease, made my chest tighten. She glanced up when she noticed me, a playful curve touching her lips. "Can't sleep either?" I shook my head, leaning against the doorway to steady myself. "Guess not." She reached for the sugar bowl, her movements slow, deliberate. "That happens when your mind is too awake," she said, then added with a teasing glance, "You always were the type to think too much." I frowned lightly, caught off guard. "You think so?" Her smile widened just enough to show she'd been watching me more closely than I realized. "Of course. You see things. You notice details most people let slip. It's rare. The way she said it wasn't casual. It wasn't even friendly. It was personal. As if she were acknowledging something I hadn't dared admit out loud, that I was seeing her too in ways I shouldn't. She handed me the sugar bowl, and in the transfer, her arm brushed against mine. It was such a small contact, yet it sent a charge through me strong enough to still my breath. I tried to hide it, but when I looked up, she was watching me with those dark, knowing eyes. "You don't say much," she murmured, stirring her tea slowly. "But you don't need to. Sometimes silence says more." I wanted to answer, to break that silence, but her words tangled around me like a net. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, the distance between us collapsing into something dangerous. She leaned a little closer, her voice dropping to something softer, almost conspiratorial. "You're different, not in a boyish way, in a way that makes people stop and wonder if they've underestimated you." Her eyes held mine, steady and unflinching. For the briefest moment, I thought she might say it, say what had been building between us since that first spark. My pulse hammered at the possibility. But then, as though catching herself, she pulled back slightly, sipping her tea like nothing had happened. The tension hung there, heavy, unspoken, filling the space between us with questions neither of us dared to answer. When she finally left the kitchen, her hand brushed against mine one last time. A fleeting touch, a goodbye for now. I stood alone, the silence pressing in around me, and I realized something I could no longer deny. We weren't just imagining this. The day it finally broke open was nothing extraordinary, just a gray afternoon that turned heavy with rain. My mom had asked Elena to take me along on a quick errand, since we were both heading in the same direction. It should have been simple, nothing out of the ordinary, but life rarely announces the moments that change you forever. We finished the errand quickly, but by the time we walked out, the sky had opened up. Rain fell in thick sheets, soaking the parking lot. Elena laughed, pulling her coat tighter, and we hurried to her car, splashing through puddles like children. By the time we slid inside, our clothes clung damp against our skin, the windows already fogging from our breaths. The sound of the storm wrapped around us, sealing us off from the world. The car became a cocoon, small, close, private. She sat behind the wheel for a moment without turning the key, her hands resting on her lap. Her hair, damp around the edges, framed her face in a way that made her seem softer, less composed than usual. Neither of us spoke at first. The silence was louder than words, filled with everything we had held back for weeks. I stared at the windshield, at the blur of raindrops racing each other down the glass, trying to steady the rhythm of my heart. Then she broke the silence. Her voice was quiet, almost swallowed by the rain, but steady enough to leave no room for doubt. "Don't pretend you don't feel this." The words struck me harder than thunder. My breath caught. I turned to her slowly, finding her eyes waiting, unguarded, unwavering. She wasn't smiling this time. She wasn't teasing. She was daring me to step out of the safety of denial. I couldn't speak right away. My hand, trembling slightly, hovered near the console, so close to hers that the space between us felt unbearable. "Elena?" I whispered, unsure of what to say next. She leaned back, her gaze never leaving mine. "You don't have to explain," she said softly. "Just don't lie to yourself. Not with me." Her words stripped away the excuses I'd been clinging to. The way her eyes held me, tender but fierce, left no room for retreat. I felt the pull, raw and undeniable, and for the first time I stopped fighting it. My hand inched closer until my fingers brushed hers on the console. Neither of us moved for a long moment, as if touching could undo us both. But then, slowly, her hand turned, her fingers sliding against mine until they interlocked. It was such a simple gesture. No kiss, no declaration, just two hands finding each other in the quiet storm of everything unsaid. And yet, in that moment, it felt like the most dangerous, most honest thing we had ever done. The rain kept pouring, blurring the world outside, but inside that car, the truth had finally been spoken. Her hand stayed in mine longer than I thought it would. The world outside blurred in gray streaks of rain, but inside the car, time seemed to slow. My pulse hammered in my ears, and for once, I didn't try to steady it. I let myself feel everything. The warmth of her skin, the faint tremor in her fingers, the truth we'd both been circling for weeks finally alive between us. "I do feel it," I whispered. The words felt fragile like glass, but real. But the pause hung heavy. I didn't know how to finish the sentence. "But you're my mom's friend. But people would never understand. But I don't even know what this means yet." The fears knotted inside me, but when I looked at her, they unraveled just a little. Elena turned in her seat to face me more fully. Her expression wasn't playful now, not teasing. She looked almost vulnerable. Her strength softened into something raw. "You think I don't ask myself the same questions?" she said quietly. "I've spent years doing what's expected, smiling when I didn't feel like it, playing it safe." Her voice wavered, just slightly, before she caught it. "And then you look at me like I'm not invisible. Do you know how rare that is?" Her words hit me deeper than I expected. I squeezed her hand, not thinking this time, just needing her to feel it. Our fingers tightened together, interlaced now, a silent promise neither of us dared to name. "I don't see you as invisible," I said, my throat tight. "I see you more than I should." The corner of her mouth lifted at that, a sad, tender smile. She shifted closer, so close I could see the raindrops clinging to the strands of her hair. The space between us felt impossibly small, yet charged with everything we weren't crossing. "We can't undo this," she murmured. "Once it's out in the open, it changes everything." "I know." My voice cracked, but I didn't let go of her hand. We sat there, holding on to each other, both of us suspended between fear and longing. For a moment I thought she might close the distance and maybe I would have let her. But instead, she leaned her forehead gently against mine. No kiss, no rush, just the soft weight of her closeness, the warmth of her breath mingling with mine. It was the most intimate moment of my life, because it wasn't about desire alone. It was about trust, about choosing to admit something that terrified us both. When she finally pulled back, her hand lingered in mine, her thumb brushing once over my skin before she let go. Her eyes searched mine, steady but uncertain. "So," she whispered, "what do we do now?" I didn't have an answer. Not yet. But I knew this. Whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed felt different, though nothing on the surface had changed. Elena was still my mom's friend, still the familiar presence at dinners and visits. But between us, everything was altered. Every glance carried weight. Every brush of contact hummed with the memory of the rain and the confession neither of us could take back. I tried to act normal, to bury myself in the routines of everyday life, but it was impossible. When Elena laughed across the table, my chest tightened. When she touched my arm in passing, my body remembered the way her hand had fit inside mine. And when her eyes lingered on me a fraction longer than they should, I knew she remembered too. One evening, not long after, we found ourselves alone again. My mom had gone upstairs early, leaving the living room quiet except for the low murmur of the television. Elena sat at one end of the couch, a glass of wine resting in her hand, her expression distant. I hesitated before sitting down beside her, not too close, but not far either. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence felt familiar now, less like avoidance, more like acknowledgement of what words couldn't quite hold. Finally, she set down her glass and turned toward me. "You've been quiet," she said softly. I swallowed. "So have you." A faint smile tugged at her lips, but her eyes were serious. "Because I don't know how to do this. I don't know what it means for you. For me. For your mom." She exhaled, her voice catching slightly. "But pretending it's not there feels impossible." Her honesty disarmed me. I leaned forward, my hands clasped together, trying to find the right words. "I don't have all the answers either," I admitted. "But I know I don't want to forget it. I don't want to pretend." Something shifted in her expression then, relief, vulnerability, maybe even hope. She reached over, gently placing her hand on mine. This time I didn't freeze. I turned my palm upward, threading my fingers with hers like it was the most natural thing in the world. We stayed like that for a long while. No rush, no need to define it. Just the quiet truth of two people choosing not to hide anymore. Eventually, she leaned closer, resting her head lightly against my shoulder. The gesture was tender, unguarded, and it carried more meaning than any kiss could have. I closed my eyes, breathing in the faint trace of her perfume, the warmth of her weight beside me. We didn't talk about the future that night. We didn't make promises or declarations. But in the soft glow of the living room, with her hand in mine and her head against me, it was enough. Before the night ended, she whispered, almost too softly to hear, "Don't pretend you don't feel this." I squeezed her hand in answer, my chest full, my heart certain. And I knew then, whatever came next, we had already crossed the line. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more slow burn age gap romances. Share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have made the same choice or walked away? Your voice helps these stories come alive.